Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
Welcome to Wired to Hunt's Rut Fresh Radio, bringing you the latest reports from the whitetail woods. And now, your host, Spencer Newharth.
This is Wired to Hunt's Rut Fresh Radio, powered by First Light. And this week, we're talking about creating some December optimism. Welcome to Wired to Hunt's Rut Fresh Radio. This is episode 493. And this week, back again with us is Mark Kenyon. Now, Mark, you've been giving us some deer reports from across the country so far this year, but I don't think we've gotten one from you this far south. So tell us where you were and what you were seeing in the field.
Yeah, buddy, I was in the great state of Alabama, which, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the farthest south. Man, that might be the farthest south I've ever hunted. So it's pretty cool. Was in Alabama last week, got back over the weekend, saw, in that part of Alabama and a lot of the South is kind of funky with the rut being different times in different places. But where I was at, it was just about peak rut. I mean, I was seeing bucks cruising is what I was seeing. I saw a good number of bucks cruising, definitely on the search. There was a good amount of sign, a lot of rubs and scrapes. So the kind of stuff that I would, be expecting to see in late October or early November. But I was seeing, the 9th, 10th of 10th of December. So that was cool. I didn't see any chasing, but one of the other guys in camp, he did see some chasing. So chasing, seeking, cruising, all that kind of ruddy stuff is happening in Alabama right now. So that was cool. And then I also hunted twice in Michigan when I got home from Alabama. So this was just a couple days ago. And in Michigan, it's definitely late season. So these deer are all on corn, hitting corn really heavy right now, cut corn, waste grain on the ground. Have seen some bucks still sparring. I've got trail camera pictures of one of my target bucks, basically my only target buck that's left in Michigan now. He was fighting with another buck just 2-3 nights ago. So there's still that kind of fun happening out there in the woods, but mostly here in Michigan, and I'm thinking most of the Midwest, it's back to a food situation. These deer are trying to stay alive. They're bedded back in sanctuaries away from people, and they're getting on the best high energy food source. So that's what I've seen. A decent amount of deer movement in Michigan. I'd give it like a 6.5 to 6.5 probably. While in Alabama, the baseline's different, but from what I was gathering from Parker, the guy I was down there with, it was pretty good for Alabama. So maybe like a 7 or 8 by Alabama standards.
Yeah, it's funny you say that this was your most southern report ever, and that you acknowledge that the South kind of has a funky rut. Even within the same state, you can have 3 to 4 different rut phases happening in a state like Louisiana, Alabama, Texas. But I just did my now I'm going to give you my most southern rut report ever as well. I was in Texas for the last week, hunting a property I got permission on by writing some letters, and I killed a buck on the last day of the hunt. But everything up until that point, including that hunt, was very crepuscular. In that part of Texas, they have a rut that is similar to what you'd experience in the Midwest. So we were well beyond peak rut there. Maybe saw a little bit of secondary rut action happening, but everything was pretty well bed to food. And then because it was so hot when I was down there, and this is something that I think can even apply to hunters like in the opposite part of the country, as far north as you can get in the United States, where water became a factor. And it was a factor for me because it was like 82 degrees for a high down there. But I think it can be a factor in a place like northern Minnesota, when you have ice developing on some of these like stagnant bodies of water. Then all of a sudden, like one of the things that a whitetail absolutely needs is water, and it becomes a limiting factor. So I think water setups in mid-December can be an underrated part of any whitetail setup.
So can you give me more detail on the setup that ultimately led to that kill?
Man, it was just bouncing around a lot. The deer was coming into a green food source. The property had some perennial food plots that were largely weeds at this point and hadn't been manicured or touched in years probably. So they just kind of kept going on their own. But for the most part, where I was seeing the best movement and where I ended up killing this buck was just on a very green food source, which I think, again, can be relevant regardless of what part of the country you're in. Green food sources can really attract deer this time of year, especially in big numbers.
Yeah, one thing I've seen, and this isn't a rule, this is hit or miss, but if I had to point to some kind of tendency when it came to those food sources, at least in Michigan, and I think a lot of the upper Great Lakes, when it's like gnarly cold, like very, very, very frigid cold and snowy, the deer tend to hit the, cut cornfield, cut bean fields, they're on those grains. When it's a little bit warmer in December, when it gets into those slightly more mild days, they really seem to turn to the green. So for me, like on one of these properties, I've got an old clover plot. I've got some grains and clovers in another green plot, and they tend to hit those a little bit more when you've got those unseasonably slightly warmer temperatures. So that's a little something that I'll key in on when I'm trying to choose where to hunt. If I don't have any other clue pointing me in one direction or another, that temperature will kind of point me in where I want to focus, where I think there might be just a little bit more activity on days like that. So I don't know. That's one thing I've seen.
Yeah, no shocker that for a lot of the whitetail range right now, they are thinking with their stomachs. And so that's a theme that you hear in our conversations this week, whether it be some natural browse or it be a food plot in an area that otherwise is sort of a food desert. And who we talk to is Garrett Heikes from Chasing the Dream TV in Nebraska, Josh Genthy from Cut 4 Outdoors in North Carolina, Luke Thorkeldson in Texas from Weatherby, and Kevin Vistison from the Deer Hunter podcast in Michigan.
I like it. So let me ask you one last thing before we wrap this up, Spencer. In general, how do our guests feel about this coming week? Because I bring that up. I ask that because there's a lot of people probably listening now that kind of feel like there's this, it's done. The best is behind me. Mm-hmm. Is that where everyone's at? Is that where you're at? Is that where the people we talk to are at? Or is there hope? Is there hope still? Is there reason to be excited to still get out in the woods?
When it comes to rutting activity, you'll hear some pessimism, or maybe not pessimism, but what you'd expect for mid-December. You may catch some spikes from secondary rutting, but for the most part, evening hunts are superior, and bucks have now moved their bedding to be closer to food sources, that kind of thing. But where you do hear some optimism, what gets some of the people that we talked to this week excited is that it looks like for the Midwest and the East Coast and the West, that there is some approaching cold weather and storms coming up that may take us, all the way into Christmas. And so if people have very obvious food sources that they want to be hunting this time of year, I think for right now, a lot of the whitetail range, it's been very mild weather lately. So if we can get a few inches of snow or some days where you have consecutive highs that are around freezing, that's going to get people excited. And you hear that from some of our guests this week.
I'll tell you what, I'm still feeling hopeful. There's time left. And I'll tell you one thing, you get that cold, like you mentioned, and if you can find those sanctuaries, if you can find those little holes that bucks go into to get away from all the people, That's the one particularly good thing about this time of year is that deer are much more concentrated. Right in September or October or November, deer can be all over the place. There's great food everywhere. There's cover everywhere. They haven't been bothered. Now you get to this time of year, food is rare, cover is rare, and people have been bugging the heck out of them. So there's only a couple little spots in any general region that deer know they can be safe. If you can find those little safe spots, you're going to find them all. You're going to find a bunch of deer. So, man, keep the faith because they're out there and you can get on them. And if you find one of those little hidey holes, you can have some really good hunting.
I dig the optimism, Mark. I will talk to you next week.
Sounds good, buddy.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Garrett Hikus from Chasing the Dream TV in Nebraska. Now, Garrett, in Nebraska, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
This past week or less than a week, it's probably been about a 4 or 5. It's been a little slower. The week before was pretty hot with second rut activity, so then I would have said 7 or 8 on a couple of the days I had.
Now, you just killed a giant buck in Nebraska. I think you said it's the biggest one you've ever killed on that property. Why did you want to be there, and why did that buck want to be in that spot?
I think a lot of it was just bedding and then doe travel. I'd been seeing a decent amount of second rutting activity that week. Kind of hung a stand for that buck specifically. Had a little bit of history with him, just one set of pictures last year in the beginning of December. And then this year, end of October, I was just doing some scouting for a couple of my other bucks that were taking a different route to our plot. And I was doing an observation sit and saw a big buck with splits come up over the ridge too from the river bottom, and figured it had to be the one from last year. So moved cameras around, got a handful of pictures of him throughout the month. And then the last week of October or November and the first week of December, he started showing up more, and I narrowed down his travel, kind of found where they were coming down into the bedding, and it's kind of just some big burned cedar draws. Had a fire there like 10 years ago, and they just filter their way through that, but they hang around quite a bit in the morning and come up and feed for a couple hours in the evening before they actually head up and out through the open to the plot. So I was just kind of narrowing down on that and ended up bumping him out of the pocket that I killed him in not quite a week before. So hung a stand and kind of did the bump and dump technique, and I think I killed him on the 4th sit, and I also had him there on the 1st sit, just didn't come into range.
And what food sources are relevant right now in Nebraska?
We just have an 1.5 acre plot of brassicas that they've been hitting really hard, basically from the middle of October all the way till now. They're really hitting it since we got this colder snap. And then we've got alfalfa fields along our other area, and then a brassica plot there too. So we don't really have much corn or beans or anything like that around. So, I mean, some of our properties, a lot of it really is just natural movement through natural browse. I mean, our plot near where I killed this buck is the only food source besides natural browse for, I think, 2.5 to 3 miles probably.
You mentioned that you've been moving some cameras around right now. This time of year, are you putting all those cameras on your food sources?
I've got 3 spread out across our 1.5 acre plot on the food source, but the rest of them are still kind of on that rut travel. And then got a couple in bedding areas just on licking branches just to kind of monitor that. And they've actually been getting quite a bit of action yet still. But I'm definitely noticing the deer grouping up again, and then just small flurries of second rut activity. But what I have seen for that has been a lot stronger than we saw during the peak rut, which is kind of weird.
What does a morning setup look like for you this time of year?
That's the spot that I was hunting him in was basically only a morning spot. So I was just kind of trying to get into the bedding area. Like this spot, it's a 1/3 acre chunk of cedars and a few hardwoods down at the bottom of a big burn valley of cedars, and they bed in there sometimes, but a lot of times they've been just moving through it. So I've been trying to get in there early before daylight, just in case anything comes back sooner, and just catching them cruising back through, either bedding in that pocket or moving through it on their way to where they're going to bed for the rest of the day.
Historically, do you notice any kind of a shift in bedding in Nebraska this time of year?
Usually, yeah. A lot of times our deer will just leave because we don't have food sources that close. So we'll notice a lot of big winter herds along the Niobrara River, and then up north towards the Missouri River on the actual ag fields. And the deer that do stick around us definitely go to thicker thermal cover, like our south-facing slopes, and we've got some super thick areas of cedars. So they really congregate in those areas.
Have you been seeing any sign making as of late?
Yeah, they in the past week and a half, or I guess last week and the week and a half of that, quite a bit more rubbing activity. This buck, the first morning that I seen him, he was making a rub right west of me at like 70 yards, and still pretty aggressive. A lot of chasing I'd seen in that pocket, and they hit the scrapes pretty decent that week and a half of where I feel like the second rutting activity was hot and heavy, but between peak rut and the second rut, it was pretty slow, and then it's kind of slowed down again.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Nebraska?
Oh, I'd say probably a 4 or 5. We don't have the greatest weather rolling in, and second rutting activity I think is winding down quite a bit, so probably just be more bed to food activity.
All right, Garrett, congrats again on the great buck. Thanks for joining me.
Yep, thank you.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Josh Genthy from Cut 4 Outdoors in North Carolina. Now, Josh, in North Carolina, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
It's definitely been on the lower end. I'd probably say a 3, maybe a 4, just because we've been dealing with some weird weather. I mean, we've been having highs in the mid-70s lately, and it's really been shutting the bucks down as far as movement. Like, they're moving really late. You know, it's really hard to catch them on their feet in daylight right now, or it has been.
What would you identify this phase of the rut as in North Carolina?
I would 100% post rut, if not already going into that winter, like that winter pattern that they have. Because like I got some bucks that, you know, they disappeared once the rut started kicking in, but they're just now starting to show back up. I think that's just a sign to them, like they're done chasing and they're just kind of settling in and kind of locking back down in their core area on that winter pattern, just trying to feed up for the winter. That's probably my guess.
Historically, do you usually see any kind of secondary rutting action in North Carolina?
Sometimes. Usually, like if I'm sitting, especially this time of year, if I'm sitting on a food plot or something like that, and I only see 1 or 2 does like together, that's usually a good sign that you're gonna have, whether it be a young buck or an older buck, there's gonna be something in tow for some reason. And I think it's just because it's a sign that usually that yearling or that younger doe is just now starting to go into heat. Or they're waiting for that moment, hoping it does. But it's very rare around here. I think it's more dependent on your doe numbers. If you got a lot of does, it's more common. Some places that have less doe numbers is usually less common.
If you're doing some in-season scouting in that part of the country, what are some things you're looking for this time of year?
I'm definitely looking for, well, you know, you can start with your fields and stuff like that, your food plots, but you're looking for browse at this time of year. Anything that's kind of greenish that the deer will browse on, whether it be briars, wheat fields, anything like that, that's their main source. Like, for some reason, it just seems to be what the deer prefer this time of year is that winter wheat kind of deal. Mainly because the only thing I've noticed is mainly the green. Like, anything green colored has been like a game changer as far as like what I've seen just by, you know, walking in and out of the woods, placing trail cameras, that kind of stuff.
Where do you want to be running your trail cameras right now?
Definitely anywhere where I think the deer might be staging. So, like I said, like if you got some kind of staging area, like a small half-acre winter wheat food plot, or whether it be some in North Carolina, it's been kind of a dry year, and I definitely wouldn't count water oaks out of the question either. Down there, like in creek bottoms and river bottoms and stuff like that, I definitely wouldn't put that out of the question. But I'm definitely going to hang them where I think they might be staging at, or possibly, you know, I keep 1 or 2 on the big grain fields that you have if you have access to one, just that way you know what field they're trying to work towards. And then you can use that as like a starting spot and then work your way back to where you think they're staging, and then eventually you can kind of pinpoint where their core area is or what their daily routine is going to be.
During post-rut, do you normally witness any kind of a shift in the bedding?
A little bit. It's kind of like it's almost like early season bedding, kind of. So like your does would be bedded more, like, you know, in your cutovers and your thick stuff. But for some reason, I feel like the bucks bed on the complete opposite side. I don't know why that is, but they're definitely further off of where they're trying to feed at. They're obviously more weary just from hunting pressure, but for some reason, they're on the complete opposite side of where you think the does are, and I'm not sure why that is. but it's just one of those things that I've observed this past couple weeks.
What does a morning setup look like for you this time of year?
Morning setup, I'm definitely going to go towards, I'm actually going to look for them staging areas, to be honest with you, because I've noticed with the weather we're having, we're getting set like mid 70s, low 70s. And then at night, it's getting down into the 30s, and those deer are lingering in the big open ag fields longer. So they're actually taking their time coming back to bed. So I would definitely look for like cutovers or anything like that where deer is going to kind of ease back through where they can get some more sunlight on their way back to bed. That would be my number one point of interest to say. I know I got a buddy that killed a giant 6-pointer last year about this time of year doing the same thing. He had a big giant ag field that was corn one year, I think, and then he had access to hunt this big cutover like right next to it. And he said that whenever he climbed up in the tree, saw the big 6 in the field, and it was still out there eating, and it worked right through that cutover that morning and ended up giving him a good shot. And let's just say he had a good morning that day.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in North Carolina?
I'm definitely going to say if you can hold up, it'll be all right now, but I would make it a priority to be in the tree Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday this upcoming week, because we're going to stay in the 70s, mid 60s this week, but it's supposed to drop we're going to get 75 Saturday, and it's going to drop all the way down to 59. And anytime you have a major temperature change like that, the bucks are always going to get up earlier. It's just like a shock to the system that first day of a cold front, whenever it's moving in. That's usually your best time and your best bet so that you're going to see some buck movement.
All right, Josh, I like the optimism. Good luck to you and the rest of the team, and thanks for joining me.
Yes, sir. No problem.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Luke Thorkeldson from Weatherby in Texas. Now, Luke, in Texas, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
I was down in Texas last week. I'd say it was probably a 9. I watched multiple bucks fighting over does right in front of me. It was pretty awesome to see. Some of the other guys that were on the trip actually saw some bucks breed does. In Texas, you can feed, right? So people are hunting at feeders, and it really helps watch them congregate and see what's going on. So I'd say the rut activity was pretty darn high.
So in that part of Texas, do you think you were seeing some of the rutting action from the first rut, or were you getting some secondary rut?
That's a great question. It's likely secondary rut because it wasn't like full bore. A lot of the little bucks were just kind of standing around feeding, and it was just kind of the slightly bigger guys that were still cruising around, and not every doe seemed to be hot. So I think it was probably second or late rut.
I know you said you and the other guys in camp ended up going 8 for 8 on bucks. Were you seeing better movement in the mornings or in the evenings?
I personally was seeing better movement in the evenings. That said, I think more people killed out in the morning. It's hard to say exactly why. I had a great stand where I watched multiple bucks fight. It was super awesome. The downside to that was that like the bigger boys, they seem to be more active in the afternoon. I never saw any of the big boys in the morning.
What food sources were you hunting down there?
It's a drought, and this is kind of West Texas, right near Abilene, and there's a pretty bad drought right now. So natural food was hard to come by. So we're at feeders that are throwing corn. So they were quick to come to corn. A feeder would throw, and you got does usually coming out first, and then bucks shortly after that. But they're definitely itching to get on the corn quick.
It seems like with late season deer hunting, whether you're in the South or Midwest or the West, you tend to have shots that are closer than when you do in early season or the rut. So, Luke, do you have a favorite cartridge for when you're in a situation where you're probably going to be taking a shot that's within like 150 yards?
I do. Yeah. The name of Weatherby's game is speed, right? Speed kills. So I'm a big fan of the 6.5 300. What I do different on the 6.5 300 for hunting down in Texas is when I'm Western hunting, I'm going to run a 300 yard zero. But down in Texas, I'm going to adjust the rifle down to 100-yard zero. So, most shots, like you said, are going to be 100 to 150 yards. I shot my buck right at 100 yards. So the benefit to changing the 0 to 100 yards instead of 300 is you don't have to guess where your bullet's going to impact or adjust your scope. If you have a 0 stop, you want to hold. You don't want to try to guess that 3.5 inches high at 100. Well, mentally, then you're like, well, what's that do at 70? So it makes it a little bit simpler system for that 100-yard 0. But the 6.5 300, I was using 130 grain Sirocco, and that's bad medicine for deer. We shot 8 deer, and mine actually went 25 yards. I put it in the engine room, but I didn't hit the heart. But mine was the only buck that took a step. Every other was a BRT.
And that 130 grain bullet, is that where you're going to be using from like September to December, or is that different for you in late season?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on where I'm going to hunt. I also like 156 grain Elite Hunter, but that's better for your longer range shots. That 130 grain, it's like I said, it's really bad medicine for deer and also on hogs. We shot quite a few hogs while we were down there. So we had one punch through that thick shoulder plate that people get scared of. Most people avoided shooting there, but we had one that hit through there, and that 130 Sirocco was a really, really good bonded bullet, maybe one of the best bonded bullets out there.
And if you're in a game-rich environment like Texas, where you might encounter hogs or bobcats or nilgai or aoudad, when you're in a place like that where you're targeting deer, but you might encounter a wide range of game, do you have a favorite cartridge for that situation, or is it going to be the same thing?
Yeah, if you shoot a bobcat or coyote or something with that setup, and you want to, keep the hide, you're likely to have a fairly large exit hole. In that scenario, from our lineup, I'd be looking at like a 240 Weatherby or a 257 Weatherby with a much lighter grain bullet. Still great for deer, but we were on a meat hunt on this trip. It was like kind of a field to table event. So our goal was to make sure we got meat and everybody had meat down. The slightly lighter bullets are going to definitely do the job, but it may not always drop them in their tracks, which the Texas country with the mesquites and cactus and all that, it can be really tough to find blood in dirt or in, almost nothing at all. But then the deer run off into the mesquites. They could be right in front of you, and it's just hard to see them. So our objective is to just drop them right there.
Going forward then this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Texas?
I would say that it's going to be a little lower than what we saw, because I think it was slowing down as the week went on for us. We saw the most activity at the beginning of the week. So if we were at 9 before, I'm going to say that next week it's probably going to be closer to a 5 or 6.
All right, Luke, congrats to you and the team from Weatherby on a successful trip. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Spencer.
All right, and joining us on the line last is Kevin Vistison from the Deer Hunter podcast in Michigan. Now, Kevin, in Michigan, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I'm going to go right down the middle of the pipe and say probably a 5. And the reason that I'm saying that is because deer are pretty concentrated into a secure area at this point in the season, having been being chased around for the better part of 3 months. And if they feel that they are in that secure area and no one has invaded it, they will probably move in, the last daylight hour, maybe throughout the morning, and feed within that proximity. But it's problematic to be able to get in and out of those areas and get into that comfort zone of theirs. I'm talking probably within 100 yards of a bedded deer, and with it, to think that it would move outside of that area in daylight hours is probably not realistic.
And how do you go about locating one of those secure areas this time of year in the big woods of a state like Michigan?
So I'm glad you specified. I'm going to be specific about what I know and what I can do. And a lot of that revolves this time of year around snow. We get some snow. I take full advantage of that, getting out and tracking down deer, finding tracks, finding where they're feeding, where they're bedding. It really, really just gives them up. And so if you could take advantage of that, I've snuck out before work and, rearranged some plans to get out right after snow comes at night and be able to get a really good description of exactly what is going on. Without snow, it can be pretty challenging.
What food sources are relevant right now?
Browse. Most of the areas that I hunt in northern Michigan, that is the deer's food source all year. I know you hear a lot about acorns and ag for the most part when people are asked this question. But for me, in the areas that I hunt, the deer are just eating natural browse. It's probably, 80%, maybe 90% of their diet. So they're really foraging on whatever they can get access to this time of year. Cedar becomes prevalent the later we get in the season, but I'll also add, just because it's on my brain, this past weekend I noticed that deer were digging up wintergreen, and I've seen that in years past. I never see them really eat that when there's not snow on the ground, and I wonder if that's a product of that it has an odor and they can smell it through the snow. But I noticed this just this past weekend, that areas where there was wintergreen on the ground, the deer had it pawed up, and it almost looked like they were in there just bulldozing the stuff.
Obviously, morning setups can be a bit more challenging this time of year. So what does a morning setup look like for you in mid-December?
Yeah, I like the late morning, actually. Is probably my preferred time, maybe the 8:30 to 10:30 window. I feel like deer are bedding before daylight, and they will often get up and feed and, shift their bed around there in the mid-morning. So I like that 8:30 to 10:30, and then obviously the last hour of daylight is probably your best bet this time of year. But for me, it just looks like getting into concentration of bedding, being as quiet as possible, and then just being prepared to sit in there through the later part of the afternoon and hoping to be able to capitalize on that late morning feeding and when they, kind of shift their bed for the rest of the day.
Historically, do you see much of a secondary rut in that part of the country, whether it's chasing or sign making in December?
Absolutely. I do. We have a lot of deer here in Michigan. That's one thing that we are very fortunate to have, is outstanding deer numbers, which usually means a lot of fawns that are half-year-old deer that are potentially coming into breeding for the first time, and they often will do that in the December window. So I have seen that before, where bucks are actively harassing and chasing does around, and I usually see that typically about that 4 week after what I would consider the peak of the rut here would be November 15th here in Michigan. So around that December 15th to 20th window, I have seen a lot of that, and late morning as well. It seems like when the does are up and feeding around, that I've seen a lot of bucks up cruising and looking for them doing such.
Does available water factor into your decision making at all this time of year when things are starting to ice up?
I can't say that it is. I think these deer get a lot of hydration just through their natural browse is full of has a high percentage of water in it. So I don't think they actually, given that they're not exerting a ton of energy and that there is no heat factor for the most part, that they can get what water they basically need through their food.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Michigan?
Well, for the areas that haven't been harassed, these deer, they're comfortable, and they're going to continue to need to feed. And so if we get some colder temperatures, you will for sure see deer get up earlier and earlier, but it doesn't look like we're going to have that. It looks like we're going to have average to above average temperatures here in late December. So I would count on it being about as low as possible. I mean, 1 or 2, anything can happen, but I just don't see a reason why most deer are going to be getting up and doing any kind of activity before under the cover of darkness.
All right, Kevin, good luck with the rest of your fall. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Spencer.
And that concludes this week's episode of Wired to Hunt's Rut Fresh Radio. Thanks to Garrett, Josh, Luke, and Kevin for joining me. And thank you guys for listening. And as a reminder, our 1 week in November series keeps going over on Meat Eater's YouTube channel. Episode 5 just came out yesterday. Episode 6 and 7 will be out soon. These might be our most action-packed episodes yet, so you're not going to want to miss them. I will talk to you guys next week, and until then, stay wired to hunt.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.